Welcome to Fast Effect, Double Speed Magic the Gathering from ELD's Time Vault Games. Talk about fast. Elliot at death's door. These death shadows. I think this is like turn two. He's got two lands out. I mean, didn't even get the camera rolling very far. At least I caught the end of the game. So this is a real brood that Josh has. Death Shadow, mono black. Usually you're seeing this with fetch lands, shocks, and duels. Instead, this is a mono black build. Very spicy. Let's take a look at some of the cards that he has in here, as we missed a good chunk of that first game, but you're going to want to see what this is all about. I'll tell you what, Legacy, high barrier to entry, that's a myth. That is a statement that the evidence does not back up. It is incorrect. Owning the entire format, now that is a huge ask. That requires like literal wealth management to own every single card playable in Legacy so you can play any deck anytime you want. Sure, that's a major goal, not necessarily in reach for everyone. Certainly not in the early parts of their life. As they get older, maybe as they acquire more wealth, but early on, that's a very significant trade-off to be taking tens of thousands of dollars to acquire all of the different possible game pieces to play the format in any possible way that you want. But to actually show up and start having fun, I mean, there's no excuse. This format is at least as accessible as the top tier of Modern, if not more so. And I've done a series of videos on decks that are like literally cheaper than top tier Modern decks. So it's just incorrect. I know people like to say it, but the barrier to entry, like, that's not what that means. You can actually show up as Josh did. Good on him. And he's actually had some success. We will see him again on camera after this match as well. And I'll tell you what, it's beautiful to see. Absolutely love to see it. This doesn't have any dual lands in it. Normally, Death Shadow does eventually want that first Underground Sea. This is mono-colored. It's got a whole different set of problems for your opponent. I'm going to quickly go through some of the cards we saw in that first game, but Elliot leading out with an Aether Vial on his side. Normally, that's great versus the control decks. It kind of circumvents counter magic here. Basically, just ramp. The longer the game goes, the better that's going to be. Josh did, in that first game, have Thoughtseize and Street Wraith, and it looks like we're actually seeing that here. Different art for the Thoughtseize. Both of those cards chipping away at his life total. Aether Vial ticks up. Removal we saw in game one was Dismember. Of course, that is very relevant versus a deck full of creatures. And he, I believe, lowered his life total with the Reanimate package. So you've got Troll of Khazad-dûm, Grief, and Street Wraith, all very available targets for Reanimate. Occasionally, you'll get paired up against Reanimator and just absolutely demolish them. You also have a great matchup versus the Initiative if you can strip a initiative creature out of their hand and reanimate it. That's typically going to be game over as well. Aether Vial for Elliot is going to keep things going in his favor the longer this goes. Mono black builds so much more explosive than traditional shadow builds. The real trade-off. I mean, you have a crazy amount of targets, and I believe the most popular versions of Shadow do run 4 reanimates now. I do love to see it. Since day one with Modern Horizons, I've been talking about how insane Grief is. Often said it is the best card in the set, and doesn't look so insane anymore. My thinking is Unmask, a literal vintage playable card, basically gets an upgrade with Grief. And it's not that it's the best in a vacuum. It's the stronger the format, the better Grief ends up being. The turn 0 interaction matters a lot more in a format like Vintage or Legacy, where the power level is so high compared to fairer formats. Yeah, Grief has been unbelievable, doing heavy lifting in Modern as well. It's hard to do very much after your opponent double Thoughtseizes you on the first turn. A lot of decks just fold to that type of pressure. A little bit of mana denial back and forth. We have Wastelands, and we see Elliot's Wasteland not able to do anything versus this mana base that Josh is presenting of all swamps. Port would have been able to interact, but Josh cleared it with his Wasteland. Cavern of Souls, basically just mana fixing at this point. Josh not going to be countering anything. So Twin Shot kills the Grief, because he'd be dead otherwise. So this is a horrifying situation. The Troll swings. Wow. So Troll was reanimated, putting Josh very low on life. Muxus shows up. That's like a Chekhov's gun situation. That Aether Vial introduced in the first act, just ticking away. Now, finally coming into play, putting in Muxus. This Cave Troll, so close to the finish line. And this is just like the sickest, six for six. Muxus just absolutely changing the complexion of this game in probably the biggest way that Goblins can. Stacking up the Goblins that are going to die to state-based effects. Oh, I had the wrong card queued up. So that's Plague Engineer on the board, not Engineered Plague. But all Goblins are getting -1/-1 right now. There is a little bit of clarification that we're going to sit through, as we did need to make sure that this all resolved properly. Twin Shot Sniper last turn took out the Grief. Otherwise, the Menace would have allowed the Troll and the Grief to get in there. And it's just a real problem when you're low on life. Vision, so good at closing out games. But here there's going to be plenty of bodies now to block this Cave Troll. And, I mean, this might be just enough to just win the game. Munitions Expert. So all of this is going to be affected by the -1/-1. All of the triggers will be placed on the stack as Elliot sees fit. So they all triggered during the resolution of Muxus's ability. He can then place each of those in whatever order he wants. And those Goblins are still all going to die. All of the 1/1s. Ringleader whiffs. Well, let's talk about two ends of the spectrum there. Muxus on the one hand hitting 6 for 6. Ringleader missing 4 for 4. Those Sling Gang's triggered ability to put Goblins onto the battlefield right now is underneath the Ringleader, underneath that Munitions, which had resolved. So he's going to end up getting 3 bodies, 2 from the Sling Gang, and then 1 from the Mog War Marshals enter the battlefield. His leaves the battlefield is already resolved. It was a little inaccurate in terms of how the cards were displayed there because they didn't go to the graveyard appropriately, but he was just using them to represent their place on the stack. Make sure both players understand how everything's resolving, which we will allow just to make sure everybody's on the same page. You just have to communicate that the cards are, in fact, in the graveyard. Can't circumvent an effect like Surgical Extraction or something if it would be relevant. Really just trying to make sure both players totally understand the situation. And this is an unbelievable reversal. Muxus just showing up and bringing the party as he does. Goblin Ringleader turns sideways. Now the Troll. Oh, and another Muxus on top. This is going to be a giant Goblin when he turns sideways. Everything else is going to get through. And that's a wrap. Wow, game 2 going to Elliot. Pulling that one out with just, I mean, maybe the best Muxus of all time. Let me know if you've seen a more spectacular reversal with the Goblin Grande. I feel like it's Grande. That sounds like he'd want it pronounced. Goblin Grande. All right, we got this sticker shenanigans. Affinity cards actually seeing play in this list. Allows for some ramp for Turbo Muxus. Turn 1 Aether Vial. Did a lot of work last game. See what it does for him this game. The longer it goes, the better it gets. Josh doesn't have the ability to counter it, but he's going to look to close that window before Aether Vial really starts paying dividends. 2 mana Dark Ritual into Grief. Better than just pitching on the first turn. Sees Muxus, Lackey, War Marshal. Wouldn't be surprised if Muxus is the grab, even though it's very far away from happening. These other cards actually don't line up very well versus Grief. Oh, that's a Matron. Did not recognize it. There's an altar on there. Yeah, Matron, very clear pick. Extra body. And Demonic Tutor, essentially. Also makes great use of the Aether Vial. Now Thoughtseize. Got a reader. It's like Goblin Pack something. Let me know in the comments what this guy is. I think he gives Battle Cry back. Mono black. Not really super well equipped to handle Aether Vial. I mean, you could have artifact answers to it. Pithing Needle, Revoker, but Goblin's not a huge percentage of the meta like it used to be. It was at one point the best deck in the format. For as fast as that first game was, this has turned out to be a heck of a match. Spectacular game 2 recovery. This game 3, both sides digging in. Another reader here. I'm actually not sure what that card is. It's clearly from Lord of the Rings. Again, let me know on that one. An Orcish Bowmaster shows up, pings the token, and Grief turns sideways, getting that damage in. War Marshal, the upkeep actually being paid. Wasteland takes out that Lord of the Rings land. And a Wasteland back, leaving Elliot on 0 colored sources. Everything turns sideways. The 2/2 comes down. As expected, it was in hand. And, oh man, look at this. Bowmaster. Kind of the way it was intended to work. Like, that wasn't... It was just good. It wasn't just like a draw 7 in a 4-player game, but like it grew the Orc army and pinged. Happy to trade off the body with a 1/1. Orc army still behind along with Grief. So he's got like 5 damage on board here. Versus an active Aether Vial. But no mana. Figuring out the life totals. Bowmasters, a 4 of in this list. And I'll tell you that, I mean, it really, really does punish many of the best cards in the format. And in a way that you care about. So, you know, Bowmaster in a deck like this is actually trying to go after your life total, so happy to get the extra damage. Control decks would rather have a card like Narset that actually stops the card drawing. Don't really care about their life total till you're ready to kill them. But a deck like this, yeah, play your Brainstorm. See what happens. Dothy Voidwalker. Another card that's incidentally very good versus a lot of the format. Both Reanimator, Cephalid Breakfast, the opposing Scam decks. Both Shadow and Grief here. And that's it. Evasive, small black creatures. Just like that, Josh takes down a match versus Goblins.